They just don't make palaces like they used to. Sure, we see lots of mansions worth tens of millions today, but how many of them will be worth tens of billions centuries from now, like the royal homes of yesteryear? Buckingham Palace may just be the most recognizable palace in the entire world. Since the Western world began moving away from monarchies, Buckingham Palace has gone from a true center of power to many things, including a residence to one of the longest-running modern royal families, a tourist attraction which is visited and photographed millions of times each year, and a Netflix gold mine. Its history dates all the way back to the year 1703. It was constructed for the first Duke of Buckingham under its original name, Buckingham House. It was then acquired by King George III, yeah, the one from Hamilton, who secured it as a private residence for the Queen. That's when it became known as the Queen's House. Eventually, it was expanded greatly and began serving as the royal residence when Queen Victoria came to power in 1837. It has housed the family ever since. In basic terms, it is a grand estate that holds 775 royal rooms over 40 acres of grounds. It also features plenty of amenities, such as a swimming pool, stable blocks, and what I'm sure are the best dog walkers in the whole world. Each room is like something out of a painting from another time. They all feature antique furniture, classic artwork, and the epitome of taste. The gallery is said to boast around 450 incredibly rare paintings at a time. Calculating the worth of this house is no easy task. The home itself has been valued at around $2.8 billion. Then there's all that artwork, the furniture, and likely some secrets we don't even know about, which has been said to be in the neighborhood of $2.15 billion. So at the very least, this palace would run just over $5 billion if the United Kingdom really wanted to have a royal yard sale later this year. Though it's entirely possible that the place is gonna skyrocket in value due to a recent bit of news. More history for the British royals is on the way. Queen Elizabeth recently moved out of Buckingham Palace, which is a huge deal. It's been rumored that the staff is making preparations for Prince Charles to finally ascend to his kingly destiny, though I think everyone's a bit more excited about King William, to be honest. Meanwhile, the Queen is choosing to spend her final years by trading one amazing palace for another. The Queen may be moving out of the most famous piece of real estate in British history, but she may be trading up. Windsor Castle is no slouch and rivals Buckingham in terms of beauty and importance. Windsor Castle is a true piece of history. It dates all the way back to the 11th century. Construction of the castle began after the Normans invaded England, led by William the Conqueror himself. Since Henry I was partying under its roof, it has been used by the reigning monarch, making it the longest occupied palace in England. Take that, Buckingham. It is located in Berkshire's Windsor Great Park, spanning over 53,000 square meters. It has a unique combination of Gothic, Georgian, and Victorian styles. Specifically, though, it is known as the finest example of Georgian style still standing. While the entire castle is a work of art, it also features many priceless works of art along with historical relics like the bed of King Charles II. The grounds also hold the medieval marvel known as St. George's Chapel. This beautiful site was a long labor of love stretching back to the year 1475. It is a marvelous example of perpendicular Gothic style in its final phase. In 1992, tragedy struck the castle. A major fire spread through the grounds, lasting 15 hours and causing damage to over 100 rooms. The damage was so extensive that repairs were reportedly around $40 million. This big bill came at a terrible time for the family as controversies continued to pile up through the 90s. They even had to open up Buckingham Palace to the public to help cover those costs. Despite all of its many great qualities, Windsor Castle is actually one of the most affordable places on this list. It is said to be worth only around $300 million. Trust me, the castle real estate market is just not what it used to be. Legendary architecture in China is grander than pretty much anywhere else in the world. I mean, just look at the Great Wall of China as evidence. Mount Rushmore just really can't compare. The Forbidden City stands as just another example of this over-the-top trend. Construction of the place went from 1406 to 1420. It then stood as the Imperial Palace until 1924. Since then, it has served as a museum and a World Heritage Site that offers a glimpse into some of the finest pieces of culture the great nation has to offer. The main structure is truly breathtaking. Long rows of white stairs ascend towards an enormous red building that you could probably guess was an imperial palace, even if you didn't know what it was before. It's regal, bold, and more than a little bit intimidating. This crown jewel sitting in Beijing consists of many different sections. There are 980 buildings made from wood in a traditional style. All of it stands on 728,000 square meters of well-kept grounds. The museum features some of the finest examples of Chinese art. It's a huge collection that's said to be worth tens of billions. Estimates on the Forbidden City are kind of hard to tie down. I mean, how do you really put a price on such a cultural landmark? Well, reportedly, if you were gonna put a price on it, that tag would be just shy of $70 billion. I don't know, it still seems on the low side to me. I would have guessed at least 100 bill. As far as palaces go, it's really hard to top the Palace of Versailles. I mean, it is so breathtakingly beautiful that it's almost hard to believe it was made by man. It seems like some holy relic we just kinda stumbled upon. Originally, it was a regal hunting lodge. This is where the royals and the aristocracy would go for their big hunting parties that had to be captured by a painter because they didn't have Instagram back then. It was then transformed into a magnificent palace by Sun King Louis XIV during the late 17th century. It is perhaps the most beautiful palace grounds I have ever seen. I mean, just look at how perfectly manicured the grass is that swirls and sweeps towards the main house, which stands resolute like a home of a royal should. Once you step inside, it's like stepping into a museum, except that the walls themselves are the artwork. Gorgeous columns stretch up to meet painted ceilings that are illuminated by priceless chandeliers. It features 700 incredible rooms that house thousands of pieces of antique furniture, over 6,000 notable works of art, 400 sculptures, and over 1,000 fountains. Because how could 900 fountains possibly be enough for a place like this? All of that art, culture, and architecture combines into a pretty substantial worth. All of that splendor is reportedly worth a staggering $50 billion. Once again, I'd say this place is on the low side. The Windsor Palace is a tragic reminder about the fate of the royal family in Russia. It was constructed between 1730 and 1837, where it served as the residence of the Russian royal family. The Windsor Palace was the true gem of Imperial Russia, until the Russian Revolution ended that for good in the early 1900s. You can learn all about that in the historical documentary Anastasia. After the house was freed up of those pesky royals that were living there, it served as the head of the Russian Provisional Government. Nowadays, it's part of the enormous Heritage Museum in St. Petersburg. The beautifully tragic palace holds 1,500 rooms that all exemplify the same Baroque and neoclassical styles. It's known for its classic green and white look, which gives it an almost winter fairy tale aesthetic. Though it just makes me really want some mint chocolate chip ice cream, you know? It is absolutely stocked with treasure, too. That includes Egyptian mummies, Greek sculptures, priceless artworks, diamond Fabergé eggs, and more. Not only that, but St. Petersburg is well known for having some of the highest priced neighborhoods in the region. Its historical significance, the treasures it holds, and its sheer beauty make it no wonder it's still worth a premium palace price. That is said to be around $1.4 billion just for the palace alone. Then all of that treasure amounts to around $5 billion. Mummies can go for a big price, apparently. Altogether, the ill-fated home of the Romanovs still has a worth of around $6.4 billion. That's not bad for a palace that hasn't seen a royal in over 100 years. Japan is well known for holding some of the greatest works of architecture the planet has ever seen, so it's no shock at all that the Tokyo Imperial Palace is an absolute masterwork to take in. Originally, the site held the famous Edo Castle, which was constructed in 1457. After the shogun resigned, this led to the Meiji Restoration of 1868, which established imperial rule in Japan under the titular Emperor Meiji. Over 100 years later, it still houses a Japanese emperor. It is currently the home of Japanese Emperor Naruhito, since his elderly father abdicated the position due to his advancing age. The palace is separated into its main structure, museums, official buildings, and more. These stretch over 3.41 square kilometers in Chiyoda, one of the nicest areas in Tokyo. The main structure is a gorgeous example of classic Japanese architecture. Its sweeping rooftops, bold white color, and its position right off the water makes it look like a building you'd want to paint just as much as one worthy of holding a modern-day emperor. The interiors are also gorgeous, offering a delightful mixture of classic Japanese style with modern aesthetics and just a hint of grandiosity. I mean, a palace like this has to be a little bit grandiose, right? Perhaps most impressive are the grounds' series of luscious gardens. Those include tea houses and several natural gardens, which offer some of the greatest sights of natural splendor you're liable to see in Japan, and that is really saying something. So how much does Tokyo's imperial home go for? It's been reported to be somewhere around $12 billion. Those gardens alone must be worth at least a few of those billions. What happens to a palace when the royals it is supposed to be housing meet the wrong end of a guillotine? Well, it seems to be fashionable that after your reign is brought to a swift and violent end, that your people take your home and turn it into a museum. I mean, it is the least they can do, after all. Perhaps no palace to museum transition has gone better than the Louvre in Paris, France. The place actually dates back to the 14th century, when it was a proper home for the French royal family. After the French Revolution ended their monarchy, which you can learn all about in the documentary Les Mis, the Louvre was no longer needed as a royal residence. So that's how it eventually came to be known as one of the most famous museums in the world. The Louvre today is one of the most famous features of one of the most famous cities on Earth. I mean, no tourist guidebook of the city is complete without a trip to the Eiffel Tower, a trip to the Louvre, and then at least one musketeer sword fight through the streets. That still happens, right? Across its 210,000 square feet are some of the finest works of art ever collected by man. Those include the likes of the one and only Mona Lisa by Leonardo da Vinci. It alone is worth over $1 billion. All of the priceless works of art have a collected value projected to be around $35 billion. The Louvre itself is worth around $10 billion. So altogether, this former palace turned museum is worth over $45 billion. This might be the only one, though, that shouldn't be worth quite so many billions. That's because it's been said for a long time that a good deal of the paintings you can pay to see there aren't the real deal at all. Most notably, many think that the billion-dollar Mona Lisa isn't the real one after all. So when you start buying up museums worth 3 commas, make sure to get all of the art appraised before you sign those checks. Only one palace on this list is not only one of the greatest locales in this galaxy, but the galaxy far, far away as well. The royal palace of Caserta served as the residence of the King of Naples. More importantly, though, it also served as the palace of Queen Amidala of Naboo in Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. It stands as the largest palace erected in the 18th century in Europe. The whole process began in 1752 for Charles VII of Naples. It took several decades for the place to be completed and is reported to have cost an absolute fortune, estimated to be around $300 billion in today's money. Today, that effort seems to have paid off well, with its square building and round garden just as iconic today as it was all the way back then. The inside is just as breathtaking, with some of the finest examples of architecture you will ever see. Rounded ceilings feature priceless works of art in their center that might bring you to tears. It also features several parks that hold classic statues against serene bodies of water and lush greenery. While it mostly stands as a tourist attraction, it has definitely rebranded itself for Hollywood. The space is frequently advertised to be ideal for shooting, and it has attracted several high-profile shows and movies. Those include The Great, Angels and Demons, and Mission Impossible 3. It is said to be worth several billion today, though I have no idea how much it's worth on the planet of Naboo. Probably a good deal more, I would think. Potala Palace is not the home of a king or emperor. It was the home of the Dalai Lamas from 1649 to 1959 in Tibet. It's an example of a Zong fortress, which was a very distinct form of fortified monastery. While that sounds like the coolest setting for battle ever, it's actually a place that evokes peace and personal enlightenment. The fifth Dalai Lama began construction on the place in 1645. It has served as a spiritual landmark for those of the Buddhist faith ever since, though it did feature a few moments that were not quite so peaceful. During the Tibetan uprising in the 50s, shells were shot into the windows. The palace was then stormed, and according to some historians, 100,000 volumes of scripture and historical documents were stolen, along with classic works of art. It is a truly stunning palace that is stationed on top of snow-kissed mountains. Long staircases lead up from one structure to the Red Palace, White Palace, and monk dormitories. The vibrant red of the main palace really shines against the white all around it. Across from the palace are still waters and serene wilderness in all directions. Try not to find inner peace while visiting a place like this. Unfortunately, the Potala Palace doesn't quite boast as many priceless works of art as some of the others on this list. Not anymore, anyway. That's why it reportedly comes in at only around $22 million. Something so breathtaking may only be worth tens of millions instead of billions, but it's hard to put a price on a place so spiritually significant. Apparently, being able to find true enlightenment in a way that makes you feel at one with the seemingly random chaos and suffering of the universe just doesn't bring in the big bucks. Just think, in a few hundred years, they will be doing YouTube videos about the palaces of Drake and Michael Jordan. I bet Drake Manor is still worth millions.